mode.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our webinar today, Activating Your .bank domain name, the next steps once you have secured and verified your .bank name. I'd like to remind you that all slides will be recorded and can be downloaded at www.encirca.com/bank. So these will be our webinar presenters today. Unfortunately, Craig Schwartz, FTLD Registry Managing Director, could not make it. His slides will be covered by Thomas Barrett. We also have Rob Holmes, Return Path General Manager, responsible for email fraud protection services, previously at leading service providers in the DNS and brand protection industry. And Thomas Barrett is the president of Encirca, sole registrar serving on .bank's Security Requirements Working Group, founded in 2001 in Boston, Massachusetts. So this will be our agenda for today: why you should move to .bank, DMARC and .bank, and finally .bank mitigation strategies. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please enter them into the GoToWebinar widget. All questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tom Barrett on .bank statistics.
Thank you, Andrew, and welcome everyone today to our September webinar for .bank. Real quickly, Craig reports that the registry has 5,900 .bank registrations, and again, about 90+% of these are U.S. based. In terms of those that have not yet completed verification, there are about 900 still pending the verification process. This is very important because some of these 900 include names that were registered back in May and June as part of the sunrise period and the land rush. And there's a 90-day window where these verifications need to be completed, or they do get deleted. The names can be re-registered, but the registry will then hold back a non-refundable fee, processing fee basically. And so you may have, if you received a phone call or email from us regarding this, we do urge you to respond to us or directly back to Symantec and get that verification completed so that you can start using your .bank domain name. Some of the issues that we are running into, the number one issue is Symantec having issues verifying employment and authority. Another issue we're seeing is there are some entities that applied for .bank that in fact were not eligible. This includes not only credit unions but also bank holding companies. In the case of bank holding companies, the registry is allowing some of those to keep their names, but they're not allowed to actually use the names. So they're considered a defensive registration that will not resolve in the DNS. So why should you move to .bank? .bank is designed to address the root causes of online banking fraud. The upfront verification process virtually eliminates cyber squatting, and the various security standards, which you'll hear about, help make online banking more secure. And so the hope is that consumers will learn to trust websites and email that use the .bank domain names. And you'll hear more about that in particular with our next speaker. So why is .bank so expensive? Well, clearly there's a lot of upfront screening that goes into making sure that no bad actors are allowed to get a .bank domain name. The registry has already started the ongoing monitoring process, and so we do have customers who are receiving non-compliance notices that they have not correctly set up their .bank domain name. Some of these are easy to fix, especially if you're using our DNS. We can make sure that the DNS works correctly. If you're not using our DNS, then you need to go to your DNS provider to fix some of these problems. Some of them are related to how you're doing your web hosting as well, in which case you need to get your web host provider involved. But again, we can help you if you are receiving one of these notices. And there are obviously other things involved in migrating to .bank that we're going to cover in more detail later in this webinar. So the registry has published a guide called A Guide to Leveraging .bank, which you can download at the URL shown on your screen. Some of the key points that we want you to remember: your domain name will not resolve in a web browser until it has completed the verification process and you have set up your DNS correctly. Now, as you know, Encirca is doing this setup for free. We've heard from some customers that they have providers that are charging $1,000 for setup. We will do the free setup for free for your DNS name servers. And that is also available for your use for 3 months on a no-cost trial. After that 3 months, you can decide to either pay us the annual subscription or switch to another vendor. It's important to remember that SSL is required even if you simply want to redirect your .bank domain name to your existing website. This is probably the #1 reason for the non-compliance notices coming from the registry. And finally, DMARC alignment is required when you start to use your .bank domain name to send out email, and that is a good segue into the next section that Rob Holmes will cover for you.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Tom, and thanks for inviting me to speak on this webinar. So, Andrew, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. So, let's start by just crisply articulating why DMARC is important, really what it does. So, put simply, DMARC prevents email spoofing. So if we take a little step back, email was never designed with security in mind. So there is nothing in the SMTP protocol that prevents anybody spoofing your sending identities. So on the left-hand side of this page, we have an example of a phishing email. And it is targeting victims pretending to come from First Citizens Bank. And if we zoom in there, you can see that the email address that it came from was an address at firstcitizensonline.com, which is a domain owned by First Citizens Bank. So you might ask, well, how is it possible that this fraudster was able to send an email that looked like it came from First Citizens Bank? And the answer is that there is nothing in email that prevents this level of spoofing other than DMARC. So that is why DMARC is important. Tom alluded to earlier kind of raising the standards to create security in .bank. DMARC will bring that security in email through preventing email spoofing. So if you scroll to the next slide, a little bit of definition of what DMARC is. What does it actually stand for? I'll tell you, and then you can completely forget it because it's a bit of a mouthful. So it stands for domain-based message authentication. So it is authenticating the sender of the message, specifically the domain of the sender of the message, and reporting and conformance. What you need to know is that it is an established protocol. It is currently adopted by most of the biggest banks in the United States of America. It was founded by companies including ReturnPath and Google and Bank of America, and it is already protecting many brands from the spoofing that I just described. In a nutshell, it does two things. It provides you, as the owner of a .bank domain, control to block domain-based spoofing, and it also provides intelligence. That's the reporting element of DMARC. So the intelligence that it provides is aggregate data. It tells you, yesterday we saw 1 million emails pretending to come from you, sent from the following IP addresses. That's at an aggregate level. And it can also provide forensic level data that can inform investigations and incident response. The key thing for you to know is that it's an established protocol offering you the ability to block those fraudulent emails. So if we scroll on to the next slide, please, Andrea. So really the value of DMARC is that it empowers you as an owner of a .bank domain to instruct email providers, that's to say Gmail and Yahoo and Hotmail and AOL, what to do if they receive an email from your domain that fails authentication. Now that's very important. It's an authentication protocol that will apply, and this policy, this DMARC policy, will apply to all email coming from your domain that fails the protocol, that fails the authentication protocol. That's very relevant when it comes to sending legitimate email from your .bank domain. Because if your legitimate email does not pass the DMARC standard, your legitimate email will be handled in the same way that fraudulent email would be. And there are three ways in which DMARC will handle, instruct mailbox providers what to do in the event that an email fails authentication. And there are three policies. The first policy is none, the second is quarantine, and the third is reject. We really want to get to reject. Reject instructs Gmail and Yahoo to, hey, you receive an email from my .bank domain that doesn't pass authentication, block it. Do not even put it in a spam folder. There is a setting, quarantine, that instructs them to send those messages into spam or a quarantine folder. And then there's the none policy setting. The none policy says, if you receive an email that fails DMARC, just let me know. Don't necessarily block it, but let me know. In fact, I'm not ready to block it because it actually could be legitimate. So those are the three policy settings. So that's a little bit of background. Now let's bring it on the next slide to what this specifically means for .bank. So these are the security requirements for .bank as it relates to DMARC. And I'm really just going to focus on the first and the fourth of these bullets. The first is that registrants must publish a valid DMARC record with a policy of either quarantine or reject. Now, Tom will talk a little bit about this later, but by default, working through Encirca, we will be able to do that for you and just have that registry compliance. Okay, so it is mandated by .bank. It is not an option. So that's the first thing to realize. The fourth bullet on this page I'll read out is, again, this is from the security requirement verbatim. When deploying DMARC, registrants may temporarily use a none policy during the implementation phase. Now, what does that mean? You will currently, today, be sending email from your .com domain. But you may, over time, want to migrate your email programs from .com to .bank. But you will remember that earlier I mentioned that legitimate email that fails DMARC authentication will also be treated as though it were fraudulent. It's an authentication-based standard. So even if it's legitimate, if it fails DMARC, if it fails authentication, then the DMARC policy will apply. And if you had a policy of reject and your legitimate email failed DMARC, then your legitimate email would get blocked. And this is where the policy of none is very important, because it enables you to tune up the authentication of your legitimate email without the fear of your legitimate email getting blocked. So just to recap, when deploying DMARC, when migrating to .bank, we can help you do so in a way that prevents any potential blocking of legitimate email. That's what that boils down to. So if we scroll on to the next slide, please, Andrew. I'm going to summarize by saying, okay, so that's great, technical details. Why is that important? So DMARC is gives technical teeth in the email channel to making .bank trustworthy. Without DMARC, all of your .bank domains could be spoofed in the email channel, and we would have a very, very big phishing problem in .bank. DMARC prevents that. And in combination with what Tom mentioned earlier, the fact that you won't have cyber squatting, it is my assertion that .bank will be the most trustworthy TLD in email because of DMARC and because of the strict eligibility criteria for registering .bank, preventing cyber squatting. So I think that's probably about me. If we move on to the next slide, I think it's a bit of a segue back to Tom, who'll talk a little bit about the nature of the relationship between Encirca and ReturnPath.
Thanks, Rob. And so we have had quite a few discussions about how to solve this DMARC issue, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're working with ReturnPath to help community banks in particular achieve a DMARC alignment for their not only their .bank domain name, but their .com domain name as well, if they haven't already done that. So Andrew, if you can go ahead to my first slide. I do want to make sure that everyone's aware that the purchase of the .bank domain name obviously is just the start of migrating your website to .bank. And so I've summarized here some of the other expenses that hopefully are not a surprise to you. But in addition to the domain name itself, which you've paid about $1,000 a year, there is DNS hosting involved. As I mentioned earlier, we are doing the setup for free to make sure that you meet the DNS standards in terms of name servers, DNSSEC, and DMARC. Our annual fee for that is $200 after the first 3 months. You are required to use SSL for your .bank domain name, and of course most of you already use SSL for your existing website. There are different flavors of SSL, from extended validation to domain validation, and obviously different vendors. The industry standard for banking tends to be the extended validation cert, so we're estimating that at about $700 a year, but again, you probably already have one. The DMARC implementation, you can certainly do it yourself, but we have negotiated some special pricing with ReturnPath that start at $1,500 a year. So we'll just make that a budget item, and I'll talk in more detail about that in a second. And then, of course, you have the same costs that you have today for hosting your .com website. You'll need to pay a website provider and an email provider to host your .bank website and email. And finally, you may need to have some revisions to your existing website. Obviously, it's no longer, instead of a .com, it'll become a .bank. So you may need to redo your logo, redo your signage, etc. And so, you know, that's a high-level view of some of the expenses related to migrating to .bank. So in terms of activating your .bank domain name, the first thing to emphasize is that it's not required. You do not need to activate your .bank domain name. And in fact, when you decide to, you can run both your .com and your .bank domains and websites in parallel for as long as you wish to. So no one's saying you need to give up your .com or turn off your .com website. As I mentioned earlier, even if you plan a park page or web forwarding to your existing website, you must use SSL. And I'll get into that in another slide as well. But again, that is the #1 reason for non-compliance notices coming from the registry today for activated .bank domain names. You certainly can decide to migrate your website first and then your email later, or vice versa. There's no requirements there in terms of what the registry is asking for. And so, for example, as part of our DMARC monitoring service, we certainly suggest that even if you're not ready to migrate your .bank domain name, you certainly can take care of DMARC alignment on your existing website domain, and that will facilitate the migration process when you decide to do that. So next slide, please. So again, if you are a Surfer customer, we are automatically doing the DNS setup for you as soon as we detect that your name has completed the verification process. And so you can verify that at the link shown here on the page. There's no cost for that setup. And in fact, there's a 3-month free trial for that service as well. So as of today, if you've completed the verification process, your DNS is already set up. So how do you know that? Well, you really can only tell by going to the registry whois URL that is shown on the screen, and you'll see the DNS servers and DNSSEC settings on the whois record. As of today, we do not have that domain name resolving to anything. There are clients who say, well, I just want to redirect it to my existing website, which we can do, but without SSL, it is not in compliance with the registry requirements. And so our plan, and we're just days away from announcing the details of this, is that we will provide, as part of this free trial, we will also provide a free trial of an SSL digital certificate. And so that name that you have can resolve and stay in compliance with the .bank requirements. And it's one of 2 flavors for that. If you go to the next slide, Andrew. One is a park page. You're all familiar with a park page. In the case of .bank, it has to be a .bank park page that uses SSL. And so we will stand up a park page similar to this, and it will have a button that goes to your existing website. So that's one option, and that is compliant with .bank. The second option is to skip that page altogether and do SSL-enabled web forwarding. And again, that requires the issuance of an SSL cert first, and we hope to announce a special discount for banks in the next few days about that. In terms of DMARC alignment, this is something you can do yourself. The DNS setup that we have completed for all your domain names includes a fully compliant DMARC record. The default for that is set to reject. The email addresses that would receive the DMARC reports from the various email providers like Yahoo and Google currently is set to return path. But certainly you have the ability to do this on your own if you wish. You simply need to contact us to remove the reject flag to none and provide us with the email addresses that you might want to use for that. So we call that the do-it-yourself DMARC option. Second of all is a do-it-yourself with a reporting service. And the reason why this is valuable is that the data that gets sent out from Yahoo and AOL and Google is not really readable. It's an XML format, and it's a bit of work to interpret these various reports that get sent from these email providers. And so ReturnPath has a reporting tool that helps you make sense of the email stream, and it helps you basically identify all the valid email senders for your domain name so you can whitelist those particular IP addresses in the case of a SPF record. And then finally, if you want someone else to actually do all that work for you, there is a third option. Again, you can use ReturnPath or someone else if you have a more preferred vendor, and have someone else help you achieve that DMARC alignment. So the arrangement we have with ReturnPath will not only help you with achieving DMARC alignment for .bank, but if you have not done this yet for .com, we urge you to do that as well. And so our service handles both .com and .bank, and it will handle up to 1 million emails per year. And that reporting and monitoring service is $1,500 a year. If you prefer a domain name audit where all the work is essentially outsourced to us, where we do the analysis of that email stream and we set up a fully compliant SPF record in the DNS, that particular price point is $5,000. And so if you're interested in either one of those options or have some more questions, please contact Encirca and we'll call you back on that. So that's our webinar for today. So if you have any questions, we would be glad to answer them now. Again, the link here to download the registry migration guide is shown on the screen. If you'd like to proactively make changes to your DNS setup or to inquire more about DMARC, please go to our .bank landing page, or you can send us an email and we can schedule a phone call with you. Andrew, over to you to see if we have any questions.
Thank you, Thomas, and thank you, Rob. Very insightful webinar. We do have a couple questions today. The first, I believe we touched upon it briefly, but do .bank owners have to set up their DNS servers, or can they simply park their domain?
So this is Tom. In order to park your domain, meaning it goes to a park page, you need to have DNS set up. And so once you go down that path, then you need to comply with the DNS requirements, which means your name servers have to end in .bank. Again, the way we've achieved that for you is if you're a rockport.bank, your name servers will be ns1.rockport.bank. So you cannot use .com or .net DNS name servers. It must be fully signed, DNSSEC signed, both at the name server as well as at the registry, and it must have a DMARC record set by default to reject until you're ready to use that to send out email. I will point out we had one client who was not aware of this initial requirement and went ahead and started sending out email using the new .bank domain name, only to discover that they had not updated their DNS record. And so we had to quickly get them through the DMARC alignment process to make that work.
And as a follow-up, what if you do not want neither a landing page nor a parked page? Can you let the domain simply not resolve?
Absolutely, and in fact, that's how most of the names exist today. And so you're not required to use these names. You're not required to use DNS. And so if you're not ready to do anything with it, it can stay dark. And that's totally your choice.
And can a bank run and maintain their own DNS servers, or can they host it on third parties such as Network Solutions or GoDaddy?
You absolutely can use other third-party DNS providers. Again, the requirement is that the name servers must end in .bank. And so someone like a GoDaddy or Network Solutions, as far as I know, are not able to support that requirement. The other thing you should keep in mind is the way DNSSEC works. Even if you don't use your registrar to set up your DNS, you will still need to interact with your registrar to do the DNSSEC signing with the registry. And that is not a free process. So you may end up paying your registrar and a separate DNS provider to get in compliance with .bank.
Great, thank you. As a brief note, I heard that the audio for our presentation was cutting in and out on the last 3 slides. I would like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded, and both a copy of the slides and a recording of the presentation can be found and downloaded during the webinar tab at www.encirca.com/bank. Now back to the questions. Is there a way for a bank to determine what the holdup is in the validation process with Symantec and FTLD?
Absolutely. They can call us directly or email us. We can also, if assuming you've been contacted by Symantec, we can even give you the Symantec phone number. Now, this should be in the email you've received from Symantec, but I'll read it out to you. It's 877-438-8776. So that's the Symantec number. You press option 1 and then option 4. Their main contact person there is a woman called Blanca, B-L-A-N-C-A. So again, the phone number is 877-438-8776, option 1, and then option 4.
And for those that have gone through the validation service and they were not approved, is it possible to get a refund for their domain name?
Yes, there is. So there is a non-refundable fee, processing fee of $200, but as soon as that name is deleted by the registry, Encirca will be issuing refund checks as well.
Great, thank you. Now, in regards to Encirca's DMARC service, is there a time frame on when we'll reach out to .banks?
Well, we've received a few inquiries, and it is a fairly new service and new relationship that we have with ReturnPath. We are hoping to get back to some of you in the next week or so. So we haven't forgotten about you. And again, if you don't hear from us by the end of September, then please contact us again. But we certainly plan to get around back to you within a week or so.
And can a bank customer DMARC their .bank email and not their .com?
Yes, they can. And so if you want to skip that step, or if you haven't done it for .com, you certainly can and do it for .bank. You have any thoughts on that, Rob?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, Tom. Just to echo what you're saying, it is domain-based message authentication. You can apply it to any or no domains. Just the key thing is that if you do, when you do migrate to .bank, it is mandated. So whilst it's not mandated for .com, it is mandated for .bank. But you can do it at any point in time. So Tom, you're absolutely right.
We have a few more DMARC questions. For example, how does DMARC work if a bank client has a service outage of the mail system?
Of the sending email system or of the receiving email system? I suppose it's going to be difficult for you to get a response to that. So shall I answer both?
Sure.
If there's an outage of the sending email system, then of course the email won't get sent, so it's a bit moot. DMARC really applies on the receiving side of an email, so I guess that's the second part of this. In the event that Gmail has a receiving email network outage, then I'm not aware of that having happened. Then I think all hell will break loose in email. So, I mean, really, when I look at the email service providers who have implemented DMARC, it's Gmail, it's Yahoo Mail, it's Hotmail, Outlook, it's AOL, and I'm not aware of there having been any outages. But how would it work? Really, if there was an outage, then actually the email that was sent would probably get bounced, in fact. So the sending server would get a could not deliver message, so the email would not get delivered. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, this is obviously email is old technology, relatively old technology when it comes to the internet. So there's actually a series of reattempts or retries.
Yeah.
You often might receive a message saying, hey, I cannot deliver your email. I'm going to try again in 4 hours. So I know there's several retries before it ultimately gets bounced by the email servers.
Yeah, good point, Tom. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And as a quick follow-up on the email marketing servers, how would DMARC affect banks who use servers such as MailChimp or Constant Contact?
Well, in actual fact, that would probably make it a little easier because of the fact that the configuration efforts that go into DMARC compliance or DMARC alignment that we've talked about are then actually done by a third party, and a third party whose job it is to configure email. So we already work with most of the big email service providers out there, third parties sending email on banks' behalves. So actually it would probably make it easier. But certainly third parties can achieve DMARC alignment. So yeah, it just brings another entity into the process, but it's perfectly achievable.
And it might help to just give you a scenario of, Encirca recently went through the DMARC process ourselves, so we would understand it better. And so we obviously send out email from Encirca.com. We had to identify the server for that and the IP address for that and whitelist it. We also send out email using Encirca.org. We also use a service like MailChimp called iContact. And so we went out and got the IP address for that and whitelisted it. And then if you use something like a Salesforce or a help desk like Sugar or Kayako, you need to get the IP address for that. So the SPF record, which is one of the things you can do to achieve DMARC alignment, basically is a process of identifying all the IP addresses of all these different systems that you use to send out email under your bank's name, and whitelisting those IP addresses and adding it to the SPF record on your DNS name server.
Thank you. And now you mentioned that you recommend demarking both the .bank and a .com, or you could do them separately. Is it the same price to do both, or do you have to pay for both?
So under the Encirca package that we have with ReturnPath, one price will cover both .bank and .com domain names. And so our goal is we recognize that you might want to do your .com first and then take care of your .bank. You might want to do .bank first, then go back and clean up .com if you're going to continue to use it. So our package covers both.
Excellent. Now we have a couple more questions. Going back to, excuse me. Can multiple domains demarc to a single IP address?
Absolutely. So I'm going to interpret that question, turn it around. Can a single IP address send email for multiple .bank domains? The answer is absolutely yes. So if you're using someone like MailChimp, for example, or ExactTarget, they send email on behalf of many customers, and those customers will all send from different domain names. So can you have one IP address speaking for multiple .bank domain names as it relates to DMARC? Absolutely.
And for clarification purposes, are .bank addresses required to demarc email?
.bank addresses, absolutely. If you are using a .bank for email, you must implement DMARC. You must achieve DMARC alignment. Absolutely. That is mandated.
Yeah, and I don't know if that answers the question, but obviously you can also demarc .com as well, right? But it's just
correct.
Correct. But if you're going to use .bank to send out email, it must be demarked.
Great, thank you. Now going back to DNS, Tom, you mentioned a 3-month trial on the DNS name server. When exactly does that start?
That's a great question. So we realize that there's been a hold-up in people getting to be able to use their names. So we do plan to extend that trial and it probably will not start until we are able to announce our SSL free trial. So if you're on DNS right now, you're not paying for it. We're not going to back charge you. And it's not until we send out, I'm guessing it won't be until October 1 that we'll formally start that trial. And so some of you folks would have free use of DNS before then.
And do you have an estimate on how long these services will be available to .bank clients?
Do you know what services do you think they're referring to?
I believe both DNS and DMARC.
Well, indefinitely. We've been around for 14 years, and we hope to be around for another 14 years. So we're going to offer these services on an ongoing basis. The free trial is going to continue on an ongoing basis as new names get registered. So that's not going to simply disappear next month or next year. And of course, our DMARC package with return path is not going to expire either.
Awesome, thank you. A couple more questions. Could you please clarify on the cost for DMARC? You mentioned it was $1,500 a year. Was that for 1 million emails or 1 million email addresses?
So it's for, again, this is DMARC is for sending out email. So it's up to 1 million. I believe it's 1 million emails. So if you have a client base of 100,000 and you send out a monthly email, then you would be sending out 1.2 million emails per year. So it's not email addresses, but discrete emails that you send out. So roughly, you figure out how many emails you send out a month times 12, and you can pretty much tell if you're hitting up against that boundary.
Thank you. Now, last two questions. Once a bank is approved by Symantec, when can they expect to gain access to their domain account?
So we are going ahead and setting up the DNS. We do have a do-it-yourself DNS interface that will be coming out in a few weeks. It's not available yet, and so if you need to access that account and make changes, simply contact us at our help desk. You can call us, email us, go to live chat, and we'll make any changes that you desire in the DNS.
Okay, and as our final question, are there banks right now utilizing .bank for their email addresses and for their website?
Yes, there are. In fact, there's a real easy way to check this is if you go to any search engine, let's pick Google for example, and all you need to do is type in the word site, S-I-T-E, colon, and then say .bank. And what that will do is that will bring back search results for all of the .bank websites that Google has found. So there may be more, but the ones that have been indexed by Google will appear in their search engine. So again, it's the word site, S-I-T-E, colon, dot, period, right, period, bank, and you'll see all the .bank websites that are resolving today.
Great, thank you very much. And that will include our webinar for today. I'd like to thank everyone for attending. I'd like to thank our presenters, Rob Holmes from Return Path and Tom Barrett from Encirca. Regarding the next steps, you can start the planning process for migration via the planning guide found at www.register.bank/guide. If you are interested in continuing with DNS and DMARC, please sign up at www.encirca.com/bank. All general inquiries and callback requests can be sent to .bank@encirca.com. I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded. You can find a copy of it at www.encirca.com/bank under the webinar tab. Thank you everyone for joining, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you.